Hey, so we're going to be trying to make a robot, and this is for our middle school and high school students who've not done much on the electronic side of things, so it's going to be a bit of a bath of fire for them, but hopefully they'll figure it out. Now, if you've got all the stuff you need, feel free to skip to the next video, but this is basically going to be a little video on everything we're going to need and some stuff we would advise. Now, the most important thing, obviously, is going to be our microcontroller. Now we're going to use the Arduino Uno, but it could be any Arduino or possibly even Raspberry Pi as well if you wanted to. The Uno just works well for us because they're quite readily available here. Yay. The next thing we've got is a motor shield. Now these are maybe a bit harder to source depending where you are in the world, but you can get various versions of them. So it doesn't have to be exactly like this, but this one works for us because it fits directly on top of our Uno. So these two sets go together. But basically all it is three little IC chips. I believe the middle one is a shift register for spacing out the number of pins we need. And then these two on the sides are the L something chips, the L2, I can never see this quite right, L293D, I think it is, L293D chips. And the purpose of those is to control our motors, okay? So I think this chip probably controls these two motors here, and this chip controls these two motors over here. Now you can also, I think, put in a step motor instead, but then you can only have one on each side. This is where your power goes in, and this is where your servos will attach. You can also solder some pins onto here, which we're going to do later, so that we can add stuff on. If you don't have one of these, or for some reason you can't find one, you can just build your own. It adds a whole another level of complexity. I think it's like taking it up a level. But if you get a kit like this, you can get lots of different sets. I don't think this has what we need in it, but you can get loads of different sets online on Amazon or whatever, which contain a bunch of different ICs. And if you can get that L2 thingy, I'll put a note in the thing below, but L2, God, it's really hard to see these. L294D, I think it is. If you can get some of those chips, which I think come with most of the Arduino kits anyway, you can then just do your own motor shield. Okay, in addition to that, we're also going to need some motors. I've got these 4 motors here. You could probably make a robot with 2 motors, but we're going to use 4 for now just because we can. We've got some wheels to go with those motors, and you don't necessarily need to be driving things around, but it's up to you what your robot's going to do. Very important, batteries. So these were quite hard for us to find in Nepal, and we were able to get someone to make them for us. This is a lithium-ion battery, and yeah, basically that's going to be used for controlling these motors here. One thing we've found, I think this is a 12-volt battery, and that might be too much, because when a kid was making one the other day as a side project, he was finding that the motor shield was getting pretty hot. So we'll soon see if that's going to be a big issue. They're also quite heavy, so maybe we could take the voltage down a bit or something and find something a bit less heavy and clunky, but these are pretty good for now. In addition, we're going to need some servos. So servos are like for moving things or controlling things, like an arm or something. So this is your sort of basic cheap servo that you'll get, and then we've invested in slightly more expensive ones because they can pull a bit more weight and do things that are a bit more fun, challenging. Anyway, basically they can do more weight is the idea. These are great as a general rule, but I think it says specifically on here that it's 9 grams, so it can't really pull anything that heavy on the whole. Yeah, now obviously you can buy even better ones of those as well if you've got the money. What else are we going to need? We're going to need some wires. So we're going to need wires to connect things together. Our blue one here is for connecting our Arduino to the computer to program it. But then we've also got some male to female wires that we're going to plug in our sensors with. This is the kind of basic wire we're going to use. We've got loads of this that we can separate, and then we've got a red and black wire. So maybe between our motors and the motor shield and the motors themselves, we'll use these kind of wires to connect them together. I've also got a switch. Now, last time when I made this, I didn't have a switch, and it worked perfectly fine, but it's nice to be able to turn the motor on and off quite easily. So I'd like to have a switch in here to be able to turn off the power to my motors rather than, because there's not really any kind of switch here that lets me control on and off. I could put in a button or something, I guess, onto the board itself, like we've got down here, the reset button, but I think a switch will do nicely. Batteries, we're going to need some 9-volt batteries and ways to connect them to our Arduino. So we've got 2 sources of power, as you'll see. So we've got our big power here, and that's for controlling the motors. But that should, in theory, be on a separate system from, we're going to remove that pin there, and have these as almost separate systems. And the Arduino itself will get power from the 9-volt batteries. Cool, anything else we need? Sensors. Okay, so if we want to be able to see our environment, we're going to need some sensors. Now these are some ultrasonic distance sensors, pretty standard. Again, you could buy more advanced ones if you wanted something like a more advanced robot. Not more advanced, just like, yeah, more sensitive. Sounds like it's going to be crying in a corner somewhere, but yeah, you could have that. We've got a whole sensor suite, effectively. We've got a whole bunch of sensors already that we can plug in or unplug, depending on what we want our robot to do. So if you wanted a firefighting robot, we'd have a fire sensor, or we could have like a, I don't know, weather monitoring robot or something going around doing temperature and humidity throughout the school. But yeah, there's different options there. And I think that's the main bits. What we also brought, well, we're trying to get, are some heat shields. Okay, so like I said, these were overheating. So I've cannibalized this from an old laptop, and maybe with some thermal paste or whatever, I might be able to fit that on top of my shield somehow, just to cool it down. Doesn't fit great. I've tried to order some online, but they haven't arrived yet. But if you can think of a way of keeping it cool, and it could just be because it's ridiculously hot here at the moment. Oh, one major thing I almost forgot. Pins. You're going to need pins. So these are just, you just break these off, and they you can break off as many as you like in a go. And these are going to be fitting into this part of our motor shield here. And that allows us to attach other things like sensors and whatnot. So we're going to have to add some pins onto this bit here. Otherwise we won't be able to attach our sensors. Okay. Okay, so that's the main stuff we actually need. There's also bits that are quite helpful. So for example, wire cutters. So for snipping the wires, these are great. Little breadboards could be useful for prototyping parts as we go along. Rather than soldering stuff, you might want to test it out before you solder it together. Wire strippers for taking the bits off the wire here. So you see here, you can't really see the wire yet. We're going to have to strip these and take off the plastic coating. Okay. Things like tweezers, tools like tweezers are also really useful. Anything else we need? Yes, solder and solder. So we've got flux here for soldering. That's like a paste we use to help us solder. And we've got 2 types of solder wire. I prefer this thinner one here. I think this is a 0.3 millimeters. It's quite thin. But you could also use a thicker one, which is much more readily available around here. So this is quite hard to find. This should be okay. I just find it less precise on the whole. Maybe I'm just being soft or whatever. Okay, now obviously if you need that, you're going to need soldering iron to actually solder stuff. Yeah, doesn't have to be fancy. Any kind of soldering iron will do, but a nice decent thin tip to let you get onto these points down here. It's really helpful to have some kind of clamp stand or something to hold stuff in place so that you can like basically attach stuff as you're trying to solder it together. It can be quite hard to hold in place otherwise. Lots of extra wiring is good. And anything else you need? Nothing at the moment. We could have like LEDs or decoration or other stuff as well. Oh, one other thing I'd recommend, I don't have it with me at the moment, is to have like a magnifying glass so that when you are soldering that you can see in close to what you're doing, especially if you're getting a bit older like me and your eyesight isn't great, then it's really helpful. Okay, so that's the overall kit we need. Motor shield, wires, motors, wheels, servos, sensors, batteries, and soldering stuff as well. And that should be enough to get us building a basic robot. Okay, see you soon with the next part.